If you don't know the difference between a visa, a residence permit, and a citizenship, you're probably going to waste time and money when it comes to getting those things in place as part of your international plan. So today, we're going to go through and clarify all the terminology and tell you why you need some of each. People often confuse the terms visa, residence permit, permanent residence is overused, citizenship. People think a passport and a citizenship are different. The relationship is actually not what most people understand. And so what I see is people making mistakes like saying, I'm getting citizenship in a Caribbean country, but I'm actually going to be a citizen of 6 countries. No, you're going to have access to go and live in those 5 other countries on a higher level of status because you're a citizen of the one and they have a good relationship. The same way an American can spend more time in Canada than, let's say, someone from another part of the world. So if you don't understand these things, you're going to overpay. We help our clients all the time understand things that make them think, yeah, why am I paying $50,000 more for that? So let's get into visas, residences, citizenships, and passports. I'm Andrew Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. Over the last 10 years, we've built a whole network of experts in-house and around the world that help high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals legally reduce their taxes overseas, protect themselves with dual citizenship, and take advantage of all the growing opportunities in countries around the world. So let's start with a visa. You'll see phrases like golden visa being used, or you'll see the E2 visa. Generally speaking, what I would call a visa, and there's many different adaptations is, a visa is something where I'm getting a tourist visa, I'm getting a work visa, I'm getting something that allows me to go and spend some limited amount of time in a country. People might disagree with this, but I would say for our terminology, let's call a visa something that's a short stay. So let's say that you don't have access to visit the United States. You're a Malaysian, you're a Serbian, you're a Colombian, for example. You need to get a visa because you want to go and visit Miami. And so you go to the U.S. Embassy and you might get a 10-year B1, B2 visitor and business visa, which allows you to come as a tourist or to engage in business conventions, that kind of thing. And so you can come at different times. That's not exactly a short-term visa. You might also need to get a visa for Japan, for example. And you will go and they're going to give you a single entry 15-day visa most of the time. And so a visa is something where you're going to show, I don't have the intent to stay here. If I'm getting a tourist visa, for example, if I'm going to a convention, you might get a student visa. That's going to be obviously longer term where you're actually going to be living there. But I wouldn't really call that a residence permit because there's no kind of long-term benefits. The idea is you're going to be a student, you're going to live there while you're a student, and then you're going to get out. A work visa, you could argue, is a sort of residence permit. Certainly if you have a job and you live in a country for long enough, you could eventually work that into some kind of permanent residence or citizenship or some kind of longer term status. But these are what visas are. You're basically going to an embassy and you're requesting, hey, I want to come here for some specific purpose. It's going to have a specific duration and it's not necessarily permanent in nature. That's my definition. So let's call those visas. If you are traveling, right? So let's say you are a US citizen. You need a visa to go to Russia. You need a visa to go to China, I believe Venezuela. You don't need many visas as an American, or if you're a European, you maybe even need 1 or 2 fewer. If you have what I would call a Tier B or a Tier C passport, you may need to occasionally get a visa. So if you are a US citizen, you get second citizenship in the Caribbean, and then you give up that US citizenship. If your only passport is in Antigua, for example, you're going to need to go to the U.S. Embassy, generally wherever you live, and you need to apply for a tourist visa, or you can apply for something else. So your ability to travel to countries where you don't have visa-free access, that's what you need to get a visa for. A number of countries have opened up e-visas. So if you're a US citizen, you need an e-visa to go to Turkey, but it's done online, not at an embassy. It's done in about 3 minutes. India has the same protocol for pretty much everybody on earth. It's a more complicated e-visa, but it's done online. You're not going to the embassy. Countries like New Zealand and Australia and Canada start the visa process online, but it's not really a traditional e-visa. So many of these definitions overlap, but that's a visa. As long as you have a Western passport, you're not going to be doing many of these unless you want to go somewhere and work, or unless you want to go somewhere and study. But you're probably not going to be getting many tourist visas. That's the province of the Tier B and Tier C passport. The next thing is a residence permit. And so again, you might hear about golden visas. It really is a residence permit where they're giving you temporary residence. Now, a residence permit in some countries does not require you to live there. So a golden visa gives it the optionality of living in Greece or Latvia or Ireland or Portugal or Spain or any of those countries that offer them, but not generally the requirement. On the other hand, I would call, let's say, a green card in the United States, that's a permanent residence. whether, when it's a final green card, that's a permanent residence, but they're going to require you to live there for whatever amount of time they deem necessary for you to maintain that green card. And so while permanent residence in the United States does require that, it also makes you a taxpayer. You can be a permanent resident in Colombia. The program for real estate investors no longer exists to go right to permanent residence, but you can work your way to permanent residence now within a couple of years, and then you don't really have to spend any time at all. So as a permanent resident of Colombia through property, I need to be there like basically 1 day per year. That can potentially lead towards citizenship, but they're not going to cancel me, and they're not necessarily going to tax me unless I'm living there full time. And so there's differences in those. You have certain residence permits like golden visas, which are set up to offer more optionality. You could also have a residence permit where I'm starting a business and I'm going to be given 2 years, and after 2 years I have to go improve the business. So the US has an E2 visa if you have certain passports. Turkey and Grenada have these among the passports by investment, and plenty of other countries have E2 status, where if you go and invest at-risk capital in a business in the United States, you can get this E2 visa, and it's a non-immigrant visa, so you're not necessarily, much like the example I gave in Colombia, you're not necessarily in the tax system of the US the way a green card holder would be, unless you spend an adequate amount of time in the US, since you have more optionalities as an E2 visa holder, but you're basically making an investment. I would call that some form of residence permit. You could argue, you could argue it's a visa, but people can go and ostensibly live there as long as the business continues to run. And so you've got a lot of countries in Europe. You may not want to set up your business there, but if you wanted to move to Belgium, for example, you could say, hey, Belgium, here's my business plan for a Belgium-focused business, and I'm going to come and live here on a sort of residence permit. And so again, the terminology is sometimes different. In Europe they have the blue cards, and they have many different phrases that are used. But I would call a residence permit something that gives you longer term access, whether it allows the optionality of a golden visa, or let's say we have what are called paper residence permits, or we have like the Colombia path where it's investment based. Right? Malaysia has a new VIP program. Thailand has an investor visa program. These are places that don't require you to spend your time there. Malaysia has an M2H program. You've got to spend 90 days per year. I would argue these are residence permits because they allow you to reside. The question is, do they force you to reside? A US green card might. In certain European countries where you're getting something based on business or based on work, if you're not living there long enough, they might cancel you. All right? So if you look at, let's say, in Ireland, stamp 0. Unlike the Ireland IIP, which is investment-based, the stamp 0 is, do you have money that you can sustain yourself, a self-sufficient visa, basically. The self-sufficient visa in Ireland, in Portugal, is going to require more of your physical presence, whether it's actually stated in the law, as in 6 months per year, which now you're a taxpayer, or whether it's just at their discretion and you need to figure out how long you need to be there. These are the things that we guide our clients through, by the way. Do you want to change your lifestyle? Right? Is it worth investing a bit more to get a golden visa or a residence by investment to not have to change? And in the case of Portugal, for example, you can work towards citizenship while only being there about a week every year. So we're going to guide you through what are the tax implications, what are the immigration implications, what are the different investment options. That's what we call holistic planning. And if you're an American, for example, what are the tax complications on the US side? If you're living in your country, what are the tax complications there? These are the things that we help people with when we're making your holistic plan. Right? How are we getting you optionality? Certain people want to move to Portugal and they're willing to spend 8 months a year in Portugal, pay Portugal tax, claim the tax exemption, and work towards citizenship that way. Others only want to spend 7 days per year. And so, again, same thing in Ireland. Spain is a similar situation. The question is, do you need a second citizenship? Can you get a second citizenship somewhere else? But that's what a residence permit is. Citizenship is basically the most permanent thing you can get. You can get citizenship instantly by investment, so you skip all the residence process in the Caribbean. Montenegro's wrapped up a program. There's occasionally 1 or 2 countries that come out offering this, but you've got about a dozen countries around the world, namely the Caribbean, Turkey, and a few others. Vanuatu, not as interesting, where you can just make a donation. In the case of Turkey, buy property. Some of the other Caribbean programs offer lesser investment options, and you get citizenship in 6 months. Kind of a hybrid option is Malta's citizenship program. It has a residence component first, but the goal is you're basically just working towards citizenship and you're only living there for a couple of weeks while you wait on that residence permit. So, for any of the citizenship by investments, you can get a passport in 6 months. In Malta, which has all the benefits of European Union citizenship, it's probably closer to a year and 3 months, year and a half. Those are how you can get citizenship instantly. There are some ways, if you're Peter Thiel, for example, and you go and invest a bunch of money in New Zealand, they can decide, hey, we want Peter Thiel to be our citizen, here's your citizenship. And that can happen in some smaller countries for other folks. If you have an ancestor, that's not going to be as instant, it's not going to be as streamlined, but you can get citizenship without living there first. And so you can also get paper residence, which is where you're going to have a residence permit and you don't have to live there to get citizenship. That's how you get citizenship instantly, and that's how you get that instant permanent status. And so if you look at the pandemic, for example, there were some countries where only citizens could get in, or citizens in permanent residence, or citizens in permanent residence and temporary residence. In the case of Australia, it didn't even matter if you were a citizen, so that's definitely a strike against them. But in most countries, I mean, a citizen means you're a citizen forever. If you're being naturalized, if you're going through citizenship by investment, certainly if you engage in fraud or you make a misrepresentation, they can cancel your citizenship because you breached the deal. But other than that, I mean, you are there for life. And so a residence permit can be canceled. The country could decide, hey, you know what, we don't like you anymore, or we don't want to keep running the program anymore, or something happens to you and you just don't meet the criteria. They can change that as you go. Citizenship is the way to keep that. So what a lot of people do is they get a residence permit. If you don't want to move somewhere, we invented the term paper residence, that you're working towards residence while only going, let's say, 1 day per year. So Colombia, that program no longer exists. That's a possible paper residence. You make an investment in property, you go for a nominal period of time every year, and you might be able to naturalize at the end of 5 years. You still generally need to learn the language if that's a requirement, but that's one way to do it. And so a residence permit also could be, hey, I'm just living in the country, whether I have a job, whether I'm starting a business, whether I'm on a passive visa, like a golden visa, and I just decide to live there, or a self-sufficient visa in Europe. I'm just going to live there and, I'll just naturalize, right? So a Greek golden visa is not going to allow you to naturalize if you don't live there. A Latvian investor visa is not going to let you naturalize unless you live there 9 months a year for like 10 years. So if you want to live in Latvia and pay Latvian taxes and learn Latvian, then you can become a Latvian citizen. And so the question is, again, am I willing to change my lifestyle? But a residence permit can lead to citizenship. Again, in some cases, it may be 1 day a year, 7 days a year. In some cases, it may be a language. In some cases, not. In other cases, it may be you have to actually move in. This is, again, what we're walking people through. Most people who want a second citizenship to back up their current citizenship in case their country goes wild, they want to protect themselves from being the citizen of only one country. They don't want to change their lifestyle, which is why a Caribbean citizenship or a Turkish citizenship or a golden visa that allows naturalization is a good thing to have if you're not entitled to citizenship through your ancestry. But citizenship is permanent status. Now, if you are a citizen, you're entitled to apply for a passport. Forget that we have said that Canada and the UK and a few other countries have been somewhat public about saying, if we don't like what you're doing, if you cause a fight at a football match somewhere, or, if you support the truckers, hey, maybe we don't give you a passport. Generally, a citizen can get a passport. And so people think, I haven't renewed my passport in my dual citizenship country, so I'm not a citizen anymore. We've had numerous clients where they were born in Brazil, but they've lived in Canada for 20 years. The fact that you don't have a Brazilian passport that's valid doesn't mean you can't go to the embassy tomorrow and say, hey, I'm here to get my passport. They may ask you some questions. I had someone who didn't speak Portuguese because they never really lived there. And they were like, are you sure you're Brazilian? But they eventually figured out, yes, they're Brazilian. Here's your passport. And so whatever other passport you may have, I have a number of citizenships. There's one I don't have a valid passport. If I wanted to call them up, I could get a valid passport because I am a citizen. And in this case, I would show my certificate of citizenship and they would issue it to me. And so passports come from being a citizen. Passport is the travel document. Now, if you're a citizen of a country and you get a passport, let's say that you become a citizen of Dominica, or let's say you become a citizen of Malta. Okay, you get your Malta passport, you get your Dominica passport, and then you want to go and live in Dubai. Malta and Dominica don't tax you just because you're a citizen the way, let's say, the United States does. So you say, all right, these countries aren't going to tax me if I don't live there. I'll go and get a residence permit in Dubai. Not every country stamps residence permits in your passport anymore. Some might just give you a card or give you a slip, but they will put that into your Dominica or Malta passport. And so that's now the passport that you're using to travel, but it's also the passport you're using to get into the country. And so, I had a bit of a logistical frustration recently where I got a new passport from a country and then I had to show both passports when I went to my residence country because they would have been confused in their particular case. Why do you have a new passport number? We don't like that. Show us the old one, show us the new one, and then come on in and then switch it over in country. So passport is something where you're stamping that kind of stuff. It's something where the visas that we mentioned earlier go, but citizenship is the most permanent status. Residences don't always have to lead to citizenship. In the UAE, in Singapore, in Malaysia, in Panama even, which is rare for Latin America, but those countries generally aren't going to naturalize you. Greece, I would even argue, even if you lived in Greece full time, they're more eager to naturalize people who are ethnically Greek. And so you want to have a residence permit in a country that you want to live. If I want to live in Malaysia, I'll have a Malaysian residence permit. And I'll understand that residence permit facilitates my living in a country. Maybe there's tax benefits in that country. Maybe I just want to live there part-time, full-time, whatever. Other residence permits you might get to lead towards citizenship. And so you want to have a combination of different things. I would get second citizenship first if I only had the money to get one. So if it was like golden visa or second citizenship. And if I was allowed to have dual citizenship, so if I'm not Dutch, if I'm not German, if I'm not Singaporean, I would get the citizenship first to protect myself with that more permanent status. Then I would look at building out residence permits first with the places that I wanted to actually spend time that offered some financial benefits, and then with places that I wanted as more of optionality, right? So I got Colombian residence. I don't spend a lot of time there, but I like the optionality. Maybe it becomes citizenship, maybe it just maintains a permanent residence status, but I have that access, I have that base, but that wasn't my first place to go. And so you want to figure out, this is what we help people figure out all the time. You may need one citizenship, one residence, one citizenship, three residences, two citizenships, three residences. You can figure out how deep you want to go, but you're building your optionality. Visas are really something else entirely. You won't really need many visas if you're the average, entrepreneur or investor who has a portfolio of passports and residence permits that allows you to travel wherever you want without going and getting a visa, so long as you're not planning on working or studying. So that's a summary. If you have questions, leave them below so we can cover these. You need to know the difference because I see people constantly making mistakes and it often costs them tens of thousands of dollars. If you want to learn more about this, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com. We would be happy to help you. We charge a fee for advice, which means we give you unbiased advice without the goal to sell you any particular service. And so we can say, hey, why are you spending money on that? Do this instead. Or why are you spending so much money on that? That's the value of a holistic plan. It actually solves your problem rather than selling you a shiny object. And you can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com.